Most conservatives I know go through a change where when they're younger, they identify as libertarians. And as they get older, they identify as Republicans. Why does this happen?
Would you like to know more?
I am excited for this episode. So I just got back from New Hampshire where I was speaking at a libertarian convention. And I had an absolute blast doing it. Really great community. And one of the things we're going to loop back to later in this conversation is the different types of conservatives and the different ways that they interact. We got to meet with a conservative group in the UK where we were at a convention. Then we spoke with the convention in New Hampshire. Then we spoke with a general conservative, like uncanceled sort of event in Vegas the weekend before. And then recently, we spoke at you've been talking to a lot of like conservative voters and stuff like that in the district.
Yeah, just like door knocking on Republicans' houses.
So we've gotten this really broad and unique exposure. And then we've got the pronatalist convention, and then we've got the broadly EA conservatives and stuff like that, which is just, they're nothing like each other. They see the world nothing like each other. And being at this libertarian event, a few things happened that made me really reflect on this. One, somebody said, and this is a regular watcher of our show, like an interactive fan. Oh, I had no idea that you guys would consider your policies libertarian, or you think that they would pass as like libertarian within libertarian groups. And this made me like, I hadn't realized that we came off as so anti-libertarian on this. But then I also started to think about everyone I knew who was conservative when they were younger. And there's this consistent phenomenon within conservative circles where, as we've discussed in the episode of like, do your politics actually change? No, for most people, their politics are stable throughout their life, whether it's conservative or progressive, at least. But most conservatives I know go through a change where when they're younger, they identify as libertarians. And as they get older, they identify as Republicans.
If they have sense.
So one answer is why does this happen, right? And then the other answer is, I actually think that a lot of broadly, I think most, intelligent, engaged conservatives, if you were going to ask them what policy positions they actually want, the policy positions they're often going to describe are going to sound very libertarian in nature. And that leads us to the episode's title question, which is, why are libertarians the worst and yet right about so many things, if not almost everything from a political standpoint? And I think that, and I'll just sort of start this, I think that part of the answer comes from the guy who said, wait, you guys would consider yourselves as having libertarian leanings? And I was like, yes. In what way do you think we aren't libertarians? And he's like, well, I thought, you would just, promote the policies that promote a, pronatalist, diverse breeding population agenda, right? And it's like, yeah, that is one of our main goals. Economic prosperity from a political perspective is also one of our main goals. And we are libertarian because we think that generally libertarian solutions, when we look at the data, support end up solving these issues, whether it is fertility.
Basically, libertarianism is the most pronatalist political school of thought out there.
Yes, when you look at the data,
which means just leave people alone. Stop telling them how to live their lives. Don't tell them all to be progressive. Don't tell them all to be
don't give cash handouts.
Just let them live their lives, please.
And one of the things that I showed recently in an Aporia piece is if you look at things like abortion restrictions, right, and how strict a European country is on abortion has almost a direct correlation with how low their fertility rate is. So trying to, in the same way you cannot pay people to have kids, you cannot force them to have kids through government restrictions yet. We haven't found somebody who's found the solution yet, but there may be more draconian measures that some countries, I'm thinking China here, may figure out, like forced insemination and stuff like that. But generally, and so yes, libertarianism works in this area, but also our economic beliefs are mostly libertarian-ish, because we call ourselves bull moves with Republicans. We think all large bureaucracies lead to inefficiency, whether that is a government or a company. So we believe in trust busting, like Teddy Roosevelt did a lot. He's a Republican who did a lot of trust busting, which is what we liked about him. So we have a, unique, but mostly libertarian. It means that most of our policy positions are going to be libertarian. And what I realized is to the people who still identify as libertarians when they are adults, being a libertarian or supporting libertarian positions just because they are the most effective position doesn't make you a libertarian. It isn't good enough. You need to support libertarian positions even when it functionally doesn't work. Heck, I'd be a communist if it worked. Like, if AI somehow makes like broadly like cash handouts work, like if in an AI world, like UBI starts working and we enter some communist like system that creates the most prosperity and freedom within a society, I'd be like, yeah, sure, that's great. I was wrong about everything that I thought politically. But for us, politics isn't about ideology, it's about the end states that it creates. Whereas to the people who identify as libertarian as adults, many of them, that's not it. Their politics is literally about the ideology. So I want to hear your thoughts on this question. Why do conservatives stop being libertarians as they grow older? And why does the libertarian political sphere have this like intense ideological stance?
Right. So I think it's because pragmatic political actors, be they voters or politicians, realize really quickly that if they actually want to make an impact and do so within the government system, you cannot be a libertarian. Like it's a really hard to get elected. It's really hard to get on the ballot and to get attention and to get votes and to actually get into office. And I know this too because at one point I was trying to create a sizable list of elected libertarian politicians to do outreach to them to invite them to a private event. And there were like 10, 15. Like it's just such a small community because it doesn't work. It doesn't work to change the political system as a libertarian if you are trying to do so through government. And then, of course, as a voter, if you want to be able to affect change, not being able to support people in primaries is a really big problem, which in many states you have to be a member of the party to vote in a primary for a candidate. So you can't, as a Republican, vote in the Democratic primary and vice versa.
So in other words, the reason why the Libertarian Party ends up sucking so much, even though it has most of its ideas right, is that individuals with libertarian values who are pragmatic in how those values are going to be implemented end up becoming Republicans, which leaves the individuals who stay Libertarian Party members throughout their entire lives to be exclusively the people with libertarian-like beliefs, but who held those beliefs for non-pragmatic reasons, which makes the party increasingly stupid over time.
I'm going to word what you're saying in a little different way. You think that their political beliefs don't change as they age. Their political opinions don't change as they age.
Yeah, they just become pragmatic. They just understand.
Identifying as Republican.
Yeah.
And then my question for you is, so do you think a big chunk of the Republican base is actually libertarian in their political leanings?
Yes. No, definitely. Door knocking, a lot of people, first, a lot of Republicans said, I'm deregistering as a Republican, I'm becoming a libertarian. Or they would say, oh, actually, I'm a libertarian. Just because at this point they're so angry at the Republican Party that they don't even care about changing it. They're just like, I just want to hurt it. And they definitely held very libertarian views. The things that I said that resonated the most with them were libertarian ideologies. And I, as a candidate, am very, very like on the liberty front. Like there was one political quiz I took that put me on a graph of like, globalist or hands-on or
Can you send me this picture?
National. Yeah, I need to find it so you can include it. But so like, right now, especially now, those who are interested in Republican causes are trying to defend their cultural sovereignty and their all forms of sovereignty. Just basically don't tell me how to start my business, run my business, live my life, report this, report that, just get off me. And that more than anything else is really taking over. I think the Republican Party is shooting itself in the foot, frankly, by moving away from libertarian policies, especially when it comes to quote unquote book bans, which aren't really book bans, but are being used as a political tool and framed as book bans. And with their whole religious bent on abortions as a big issue, thing, which is very not libertarian, right? Because that's more about
And
a
it's
coercive.
super losing in the school system.
It
Like
is
like
super.
this is a really interesting thing. So they'll take these approaches like we're gonna ban all these sexuality books and stuff like that that are entering our public schools, and it makes them look like the bad guy when what they
Mhm.
really need to be fighting for is educational freedom to take their kids out of the public schools. If you get those books out of the public school library, do you think your purple-haired teachers aren't gonna be showing it on slideshows? Like, think about it. Think about it. You have achieved nothing except making yourself look like the villain. Now, the left out there banning Dr. Seuss, holding book burnings of Anne Frank's diary. Like, they look like the bad guys if it wasn't just they could then say, well, the right bans books too sometimes now. There is no reason for the right to ever ban books.
Right.
No matter how sexualized the stuff in public school libraries is, your kids shouldn't be in those schools. And if it's in the library, that means it's in the classrooms.
Mhm.
And you have achieved nothing but a symbolic victory by getting it out of the library while making yourself look like the bad guy. And this is what we mean when we say the libertarian position is always the most effective, whatever goal you are fighting. Or it's always the most effective if you're actually right. Is what I would say. If you believe a bunch of things about reality that just are not true, then yes, you need to shield people and your children from information to win these ideological battles. If
Mhm.
what you believe is true and most effective, in terms of corporate structures, for example, if it turns out that DEI actually does hinder a company's operation, eventually the non-DEI companies will outcompete them or shareholders will see this.
Exactly.
And it may take a while. It may be a big cultural fight, but eventually that's how you get these systems out. If you take an approach like attempting to ban certain ideas and stuff like that, you just make them appealing to dissenters, which is the key way that I think progressivism really got off initially within college campuses and stuff like that, is it was seen as a dissident cultural group. And conservatism being the dissident cultural group now gives it this little push. But if the long-term goal of that dissident cultural group is to do things like, ban pornography and stuff like that, it's not gonna attract the young dissidents anymore, or not at the same level. So I think that's interesting. And I think that you're onto something with this intuition that people aren't really changing their political beliefs that much, that they actually do still stay libertarian at heart,
Yeah.
a lot of the conservative base. Now, this leads me to another interesting thing is we know a lot of conservative politicians. And I'd say that many, or actually most, almost all the ones we know, in their personal beliefs are actually very libertarian, but in the way they vote in office, don't vote libertarian. They vote like classic Republicans.
I think the bigger point too is as a politician, you kind of have your hands tied quite often. Like you
Well,
don't.
no, I don't think that's it. I think that there's a perception among the conservative elite, like the GOP Inc. that owns the GOP party or the old party,
Mhm.
that the theocratic faction of the GOP is actually much more powerful than they really are in terms of imposing cultural values using government systems.
Mhm.
And it has led to some massive miscalculations on their part, like the huge backlash that they had after the Roe versus Wade overturn and stuff like that.
Gosh, yeah. Yeah.
There is just not as much support for their beliefs as they think, and that might be true. Like that, there just isn't. That there's a perception in the same way that we talk about in that one video of there's a perception of a meaningful racist Republican base. When if you look at 538 polling, Nate Silver, mainstream demographer and poller, this guy showed that until Obama was elected, more white Democrats than white Republicans wouldn't vote for a black president. And even up until today, where Republicans do show slightly more racist views on some things, it's small. It's a difference of like 2 to 3% when contrasted with Democrats. There just is not a significant Republican racist base,
Yep.
despite the media portraying it as such. And I think that this is also true potentially with the theocratic base. And this creates this boogeyman that leads Republicans to act much less libertarian in their voting pattern than they otherwise would be if they were responding to their base.
So wait, just to make sure I have this right, you're saying they have a misunderstanding of what the Republican Party actually is comprised of.
This could be it. Or it could be that our district is just much more libertarian in terms of going out there and talking to people. Although we've been to a number of conservative conferences, and the only one that was distinctly non-libertarian was the one in the UK.
Yes. Yeah. Well, okay. So I will say one thing about the religious people that I've spoken with in our district when door knocking, who do really care about abortion as an issue. No one shut their door in my face about abortion. When, they would ask me like, well, what's your stance on abortion? And
Mhm.
I say that it's up to each group. So if you're Catholic, that's great, but you can't impose Catholic views on abortion on other people. You have to care for your own, essentially. But they would slam the doors in my face if I said that I didn't think Trump was a complete douche and that I thought, I should destroy him. So there's that.
Well, I think this is a level of kindness. I think that, you get more kindness from cultural conservatives and non-cultural
Oh,
conservatives. And
okay,
I'll
that's
post the
fair.
food graph here where there was a great thing, and we'll go over this in another video, where they asked countries, is food a human right? And like the only country that said no was the United States. And then they superimpose a graph of how much money various countries give to foreign aid. And the United States gives overwhelmingly more on a per GDP basis. And we'll go into this deeper on another video. The United States gives about double the next highest nonprofit donation country, which is New Zealand. This is on a per GDP basis. To give you an idea of like when you're talking about more communist countries like China,
Mhm.
not as like communist capitalist, but whatever, like different mindset. For every dollar that Americans, and this is on a per GDP, so you can't say that they're poorer, for every dollar cost adjusted that Americans give to charity, people in China give 2 cents. So yeah, no, Americans are overwhelmingly, and I think that this is this conservative mindset, overwhelmingly more generous than other groups. And conservatives are generally, they give to charities at much higher rates.
Yes, yeah, I've seen those stats for sure.
And I think that this might be what you're saying is when they disagree with you for a conservative reason versus for a progressive-y reason, even if they are a conservative.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
they're just ruder and they're more like.
I had not thought about that. I'd not.
But I take another stance here, which is it could be that the theocratic groups that are interested in imposing their cultural values through governing systems, and those cultural values aren't progressive, but theological in nature, that these groups are much more likely to vote. That might be it as well. Like they're easier to capture as a voting bloc.
Yeah, but here's where I think also there's a misunderstanding is I, I'm under the impression that the Republican Party did start to turn against abortion when they didn't really care before to court these religious voters, and those religious voters are active. I don't think it was the goal of the religious voters necessarily to impose their theocratic views on everyone else. Maybe I'm wrong
The
there.
abortion issue is a very weird one. So, for people who
Yeah.
don't know, in the 1970s, the Republican Party was more pro-life than the Democratic Party because, of course, it's small government. Get the government out of my life. It's consistent with Republican values. They wanted to capture the Catholic vote, which was mostly, recent immigrants, the Irish, which at that time were not seen. I mean, they'd been here for a few generations, similar to like Hispanic immigrants today or something. And they're like, let's see if we can capture them. The same way Simone and I always talk about capturing the Hispanic vote for the Republican Party, which is underway. But I think there's some big changes you can make. But anyway, so they took this anti-abortion stance to capture the Catholic vote. It worked, but an anti-abortion stance was never an evangelical Christian position up until this point. This is not an evangelical theology. This is not like a mainstream evangelical position at all. And we pointed out in another video, it's not a historic Catholic position either. You look at someone like Thomas Aquinas or Augustine of Hippo, they thought that life began 30 days after the fetus started developing. Well, 30 to 40, depending on gender, long story here. The point being is it is weird now that some evangelicals, despite having no cultural reason to do so, have taken abortion as like this is my line in the stand issue, when they're really doing it from almost a fronting position, because it's not a historic, but like this isn't even like they're like 2 generations ago, this wouldn't have been a position their ancestors would have had. Like it's weird. It's like something that has changed within the last 30 years. It's weird.
Mhm.
But it shows that for a lot of this, it's not about theological concerns. It's people who want to be seen as culturally aligning with a community, and they want the community they believe they culturally align with to control social values, and they want to use the government as a tool to achieve that. But I mean, unfortunately or unfortunately, however you want to see it, that mindset's going to die out pretty soon because these groups are so on the back foot in terms of voting capabilities. And the Republican Party has become much more of a diverse alliance. But the final thing I wanted to really talk about here was the different conservative conferences we've been at recently and
Mm.
different ways that people have reflected conservative values at these conferences, which has been very, very interesting to me.
Yeah, well, and I think it's really helped us solidify the different types of conservative in like Europe, but and sort of globally, and then in the US. And I feel like the US is so it's like the US politically, to me, feels like the Japanese street fashion of politics. And that you've got these very cutting edge, high fashion, avant garde political movements. And there are a bunch in Europe as well, but they're just not as flamboyant. They are not, they're not
Well, so let's
dressing like Gothic
contrast, for
Lolitas. You know what I
example,
mean?
ARC, which was this like private, Jordan Peterson, Louise Perry event in the
Yes.
UK.
Which was filled with conservatives, not just from the UK, but throughout Europe and also Australia.
Yeah, and they had very bleak views of the future. It was more just barely hold out for their cultural value system.
It was more just curmudgeonly, like, well, it's all eroding. Like Western culture is just gonna disappear, and that's really sad. And can't you believe that our society is so debauched now? It was just whiny and it was resigned.
Yeah, very resigned. And like mainstream talking points with them was stuff like banning pornography, banning IVF, a lot of honestly very nanny state stuff, like
Very.
ideas like banning kids access to the internet,
But also fighting existing nanny state stuff. For example, in the UK, like there are really stringent babysitting qualification laws. So you can't just like hire your neighbor to watch your kid.
but conservatives put those in place.
I know, but like it just seems
so people
everything
understand
was
why they
oppressive.
put them in places. Some kid killed another kid in like a babysitting situation. And so then they put these ridiculous policies in place that basically make it totally cost prohibitive to have childcare in the UK.
Mm-hmm. It is ridiculous. And so everything just feels oppressive. It feels ossified, and they don't dream big either. It's just like, well, I hope we can make this tiny incremental change, which is practical. I mean, I have to admire the pragmatism there. But then when we contrast that
Well, hold
with
on. First, I want to say before we contrast it, they were really afraid of taking explicitly religious positions as well. They would not say, I believe X because of my religion, because they were afraid of being called like the crazy Christian, which apparently is this thing that BBC has built up as a trope that everyone's afraid of identifying with. Like, I do not know how the BBC still exists as a government funded entity. That should not, like, it's as insane as NPR existing in the US, but it's like a bigger cultural player because they demand a TV tax from every household with a screen. It's insane. Anyway.
Yeah.
So let's go to the US one. So in contrast,
in the US, there are these different schools of thought, right? So you have these like libertarians who are extremely ideological. You told me about someone paying you with a laminated piece of gold for something.
Yeah, but that was the libertarians. So let's be clear. The libertarians were very different from the classic conservatives.
Oh, no.
The
And classic conservatives.
There's two groups of conservatives. One I'd call the dumb conservatives, and the other I'd call the classic conservatives. Okay. So the dumb conservatives are the ones that we're interacting with in terms of like the local political like events and stuff like that, where it's like the other people who are running for office and stuff like that. And they're just like, you were like, oh, you're talking to the other sentient person who happened to be a local politician. That's why you decided to follow up with him, because we had to follow up with one of them today, and it was like, why did I choose this person? I don't remember. And you're like, well, he seemed like one of the few sentient people at the event. So as much as we joke about like the left being NPCs, you've got to understand local like HOA conservatives, I guess I'd call them, local politics conservatives, they're just as NPC. Like they don't have strong opinions on anything.
When it comes to our worldview and means of discussing things, which is very high level. You can say that these people are highly respectable from the perspective of them being people who care about their local communities and local issues and everything else.
Yeah, but then there's the conservative base who's very different in the US. So this is the group that we're meeting at conventions and stuff like that.
Yes.
They are totally different from the UK group. They, like, every time you talk to one, they are looping you into like their private conspiracy theory and their world belief. Like that's often how they start conversations, is with some conspiracy theory. And it's do you either know about this conspiracy theory? And when I should say conspiracy theory, most conspiracy theories recently have turned out to be fact. Like conspiracy theories are betting like 9 out of 10 recently. So when I say conspiracy theory, what I mean is it's some angle of viewing society which is non-mainstream accepted, but I'm just using the term conspiracy theory because that's what the left would call it. But they come up to you very conspiratorially, like, hey, like, are you in on like X? And you either know about it and they're like, oh my god, we're immediately best friends because you're like part of my tribe, or it's like, oh my god, I need to like tell you about this and like look at the stats and like here are 5 papers, and they're really excited about this, right?
Well, and it feels extremely inclusive, where like
Yeah.
in contrast, going to the conservative conference in the in the UK with many people from around Europe and Australia, it felt very much like exclusionary, that people were being very guarded. They weren't trying to bring you in. They
Well,
didn't
they
want
were
you as
all
a part
about
of their
trying to
community.
determine your position in the local status hierarchy.
Yeah, but there was no like, come in, join my thing, like talk with me about my ideas. And then at the other conservative conference we just got back from in Vegas, it was like, oh man, you need to know about this. I've got to tell you, like you should, and you can do this and you can do that, and I'll show you everything. Don't worry. And you felt like someone was trying to induct you into their own little secret society where they understood the truth about something. And
Yeah,
they wanted
it's
you to
very
know.
interesting. So there's like the classic joke about the hippies. They did this in a South Park episode, like, I got some stuff you should read.
I've got some stuff you should read.
Where the hippies used to do this, and it was to assert dominance over you. So this is something that ultra progressives often do, is they will say, like, I have access to information that you don't have access to, and that access to information makes me higher status, and that I recommend you go out and read that. Like, I can't afford to teach you. What is the classic like progressive line? Like, I don't have time to teach you, or something like
Or
that.
like,
Or
it's not my
job.
responsibility to educate you.
Yeah, it's not my responsibility to educate you. No. Conservatives in the US, like the base, they do not feel that way. They are excited and privileged to educate you, and they cannot wait for you to dive into it, which is really exciting and interesting to see this level of vitality in the base of the Conservative Party.
Vitality is a great word for it.
Yeah, it has like a huge level of vitality, but it also can be a little off the rail. You know, sometimes when people talk to me about this stuff, I'm like, wow, that's actually a really interesting take on reality. The problem is not everyone is smart. And so some of their takes on reality are just like really dumb actual conspiracy theories. And, you know, I have to humor them, and like they're obviously nice people who want to include us, but it shows that like it's not all good to have everybody in charge of coming up with their own view of reality and distrusting all of authority. Like there's a reason why we trusted authority to some extent to begin with, because not everyone is smart enough to parse all the information themselves.
Who are the corporations?
The corporations run the entire world, and now they fooled you into working for them.
Are you serious? We never heard that.
The government is using its corporate ties to make you sell magazines so they can get rich.
Those dirty liars!
This is a really nice town you have here. That's why the corporations are trying to use you to take it down.
Just hang with us for a bit. We'll fill you in on everything you haven't been told.
But there's at least a level of enthusiasm, and I certainly wouldn't want to ban them or, you know, shun them for undertaking these opportunities themselves and these challenges themselves. And the pronatalist conservatives were different from all of the others at the pronatalist event. They were like incredibly competent and entrepreneurial, and like everything was really focused on results. Like, how do we, like when people hear our channel, one of the things they often be like is they're like, yeah, you know, I watch a lot of conservative channels on YouTube, but they're mostly focused on the problems in society. They're not focused on like practical solutions. At the pronatalist conference, like everyone was practical solution. It was very entrepreneur heavy and like practical entrepreneur heavy, like a bunch of biotech companies, stuff like that. So that was really interesting to see. At the Libertarian conference, it was completely different than the conspiratorial, which was actually really interesting. The conspiratorial, like mainstream Republican base, is very inclusive. Like they want anyone so long as you buy whatever their pet conspiracy theories are. The libertarians were like, no, we all agree on libertarian philosophy and you are in, and it's like a big family and they've got like community and everything like that, which is really cool if you agree with their larger libertarian overlay. But there isn't a lot of room for ideological diversity within that overlay, or
Right.
your level of ideological diversity would determine your status within that community, insofar as you thought any libertarian idea was dumb or something like that, which is really interesting.
Yeah. What I think I enjoy the most, of course, and this is not any surprise, is the pronatalist political groups that aren't really, they're not cohesive. I wouldn't call them like any sizable group within the United States. I would say conspiracy theorists falling broadly under the QAnon umbrella, like they're a real force to be reckoned with, but sadly pronatalists are more of a niche thing. But maybe they represent this growing like cat girl conservatism faction that you had alluded to earlier, where it's just people who are willing to take unpopular cultural stances. Because I think a big problem plaguing conservatism more broadly is this high concern with conformity, when really what conservatism is becoming is the right to not conform.
Yeah. And that's what I think we really stand for, politically speaking, is the right to not conform.
Which is
And
exemplified by cat girl conservatism.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, it's saying like, oh, I like this weird thing that you're going to judge me for, but I'm not afraid to express that view. And I'm still going to be more conservative than your average bear.
I actually really like that term for it, cat girl conservatism, instead of bull moose conservatism, because it's just interested in what's efficacious.
Yeah.
And it's interested in what the individual likes and the way they want to express themselves. So
yeah.
Really...
Along with an element of unapologetic willingness to hold one's stances and express them.
Yeah.
Which is crucial.
Well, I love you, Simone. This has been a spectacular time chatting with you. And it's always remarkable how much our political views overlap. Like
We've grown together.
I like a lot of couples don't, so.
Oh, I know. It's scary.
All right. I'm heading out. I'm going to hit in recording.
Okay. Bye. Ciao, 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 ciao. Well, hold on. I have to show you. My new house slippers came because the ones I've been wearing for the past, 2 years. Now you have no audio at all.
All right. How about now?
Now you do. Yeah. So like the new, like, the shoes I wear around the house is my indoor house slippers. Just like now they have holes in them. They're totally falling apart from the inside. So I got these new ones and I'm really excited. And they're going to be perfect. They have little steel toes. Isn't that great?
I love that. That is, wait, how are these house slippers? You need to explain this to the audience.
We have toddlers. I mean, like anyone who thinks that they can walk around the house barefoot, if they have toddlers, like cannot. So like these are my indoor clean
crush
shoes.
An infant's skull if you accidentally step on it. Is that the goal here?
The infants are stepping on me, Malcolm. I have to defend myself.
I love your mix of like fascist looking supervillain outfit and like medieval wife outfit. This has got to be somebody thing.
Well, it's either fascist or feudal, right? That's my fashion. It has to start with
my favorite, a tweet that we drafted today, because we have this problem where everyone's like, oh, they're just like breeding fetishists or something like that.
Yeah, what on earth?
And the tweet to sort of counter this is non-reproductive sex is a fetish. And it is actually, when you think about it, I mean, you are using something that's not really supposed to turn you on. It's a form of masturbation that just uses another person. But outside of that, I mean, the reason you get aroused by sex is because it caused your ancestors who did that to have kids. Any way you hijack the system, whether it's with your hand or with a condom, it's hijacking the system.
I am so stoked for these. Ooh, rubbery bottoms. Life is good. New Doc Martin house slippers. Beautiful husband home. Life is amazing.
So can you explain for the audience why you wear shoes inside and outside?
Yes. So for context, I wear different shoes inside and outside because we, like Malcolm says, do technically live in an old farmhouse. And going outside always involves getting covered in dirt, or like when I go outside, I'm typically walking to our chicken coop and mucking it out a little and getting water and dust and chicken poop all over me. And so I need to be wearing wellies for that. So outdoor shoes are for getting muddy and dirty and covered in dust. And then indoor shoes are for surviving the trampling of our toddlers, which is why you wear Doc Martens inside and you wear wellies outside. And that is the appropriate tradition. And this is why everyone has their little rain boots when they go outside.
You know, the thing is, I actually think you're living a lesbian fantasy.
I guess the cottage core nonsense.
And the cottage core and the chickens. Come on. Okay. So we got to get started here, Simone.